computer. Okay. So, hello everyone. I'm Ken Nabb. And as you probably know, we're in the middle of discussing this book of mine called The Joy of Revolution and Related Texts. And in the previous 3 meetings, we discussed the text, The Joy of Revolution. We got through that. And for the next 3 meetings, we're going to be looking at some of my other writings since then. The Joy of Revolution was written in published in 1997. So I have other writings. And so for this time, I'm not going to say too much about these, and then we can just discuss them. We have the following items. We have 3 comics, 2 of them from 1981 and 1 of them from 1998. And these comics are, publicity for my books, and using that kind of situationist type détournement. And then we have a text called "We Don't Want Full Employment, We Want Full Lives," which is a selection of leaflets and posters and so on from a French unemployed people's movement from 1998, and which I translated into English and introduced. And then there are 2 short book reviews. One is called "The World Turned Upside Down," about the English Revolution in the 1640s and 50s. And the other is called "Todd Gitlin on the 60s," which is he died a few years ago, but he was one of the first SDS presidents and so on, who wrote some books about the 60s. And then we have a long text called "The Poverty of Primitivism" that is, you may remember in the last chapter of Joy of Revolution, which we looked at 2 weeks ago, there was a short chapter called "Technophobic Objections," in which I respond to the kind of criticisms of, again, when Joy of Revolution 30 years ago, primitivism was kind of a big item, and so on. So I had some critiques of the primitivist anti-tech arguments, and some anarchist website posted that with this guy's comments, and I replied to those. So when we get there, this is a rather detailed examination of a debate there. And then the last text is another French thing called "Reflections on the Uprising in France, 2006, which was a really pretty big event there, although most people in the United States never even heard about it. So I wrote an article about that. So that's the content of our discussions this time. So I would just like to, I'm sure when we get into them, let's start out. If anybody, I think what I'll do for the comics, I can actually show you these comics here. Let's see. Okay, can you see this comic?
Yeah, it's small though.
Okay. How
Can
about
you?
that?
That's
That's
bigger.
better.
Okay. so anyway, this is a very simple comic, and it's just, I just took, in this case, this is a Terry and the Pirates comic, and I just added in my own words to talk about the Situationist anthology. So, and then I'm going to, here's another one that's publicizing the same book with Dagwood, and it talks about Détournement, which is the technique being used here. And then finally, here's a larger 4-page comic that is also a huge poster. And you can see the whole thing here. It's based on Little Lulu comics. And here we can look at it more carefully. So if any of you has any questions or comments about either of these 3 comics, raise your digital hand and I'll try to answer the questions, or we can discuss what's going on here. So let's see, let's stop the share for the moment. Any questions or comments? Okay, we can move on. We can always come back to later on if you want.
Did you choose the comics totally randomly?
I didn't choose them randomly. What I did was that in each case, you can do these things various ways. In each of these 3 cases, I just took an actual comic, like a page. Like I have books that are like histories of the comics or something, for example. And so there will be like a Dagwood Sunday page, which is just a sort of full-page comic, little story. And I just, and for the Terry and the Pirates, that's a comic from probably 1940s something. So in that case, I just said, oh, this is an interesting comic. So let's just take out all the old words and put in new words without necessarily having to make a plot. Like in each case, I had, like for the Terry comic, I just wanted to describe, hey, there's this book out. What's the book like? What's it about? Who are the situationists? Oh, they're this little group, and it influenced May 1968 and all that. So I just had a little story there that if you just had it in words, it would just be like 3 sentences or something. And I just put them in there as they filled in the bubbles of the speech bubbles. So it was kind of random, that you would have somebody saying stuff that, maybe doesn't make quite much sense. But the thing is that by doing that, you get a different take on the message. And like if I did the Dagwood, you have Dagwood and his family talking about stuff. So you have each of these Dagwood family members saying different things about Détournement, which is this rather sophisticated revolutionary tactic. So, of course, it doesn't make any sense at all that the family would be talking about it. But if you see them if you see the pages there, somehow it comes across differently than if I just had a message. You said, wait a minute, Dagwood, friendly old Dagwood is saying this, so your guard is down. It's not as if you had whatever they imagined me saying it or some, whatever. And somehow, if you see the images juxtaposed with those things, it is somewhat random, but it's not entirely random. I mean, given that I gave myself a framework, and then I said, okay, let's see, here's the things I want to say. How about if I start with this one and fill in, and then it looks like this other guy is answering that, and so on. So I juggled around with those things for quite a while. It's kind of like creating a work of art. And I end up with something that seemed to have some coherence to it. And when I had got to the little Lulu things, most of those little Lulu things are from the Joy of Revolution. And so you've already got that message, like why do we need revolution or what is it not? And, what are some of the problems and all this? And you have these little kids talking about this in the middle of what's obviously some kind of snowball fight or something. So it just puts a little different flavor to them. Denny.
First of all, for what it's worth, I thought they were very well done. But I'm unclear. Did you start before you like picked comics? Did you already have written out what you wanted to say?
Yes, pretty
Okay.
much.
Okay.
In other words, if I think here is this new situationist anthology, which you could say all sorts of things about, but if I had to put it in a few words, what would it be? This book is dynamite. This book is, so I think of a few very simple things that you could put in a small space. And then I think, okay, let's even pare it down even more so it'll fit in the balloons.
Yeah, I imagine that was quite a challenge to
Yeah, it is. I mean,
come up with
yeah.
to say what you wanted to say in that few words.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So anyway, I mean, there is a kind of aesthetic thing to it, like nobody would ever think of little Lulu saying these things, but if you take for granted, like when I was a kid, I liked little Lulu, and it's sort of fun to take something that's goes back that intimately or something to say, well, if I'm going to I want to make a comic that I kind of like, so let's see what little Lulu and Tubby can say about these things. Mark, unmute yourself.
I mean, I read Dagwood every Sunday as a child, and I have to say, I never saw him smoke a pipe. The fact that he was smoking a pipe was so appropriate. It's like when, oh heck, I'm forgetting The Scotsman now. The Scotsman, we had a kind of deconstructionist late night show, and when he would pretend to be a therapist to the guest, he would pull out a pipe every time, and it was. And something else I was going to say. Oh yes, it seems like what you're doing falls very clearly within the basic framework of conceptual art.
Well, yes and no. Conceptual art, yeah, it's not the same thing. Détournement is like when you're turning something to a different purpose. And you can have conceptual art be all kinds of things to not really, in many cases, not having any purpose other than just screwing around to do something weird or something. It's just wouldn't it be weird if people went out on the street and then did this sort of thing or something?
Well, that's the intention, but I just think technically it falls within that framework. It's like you're doing situationist conceptual art, I think.
Yeah, if you want to call it that, but I think if you said that, people would, I think they are somewhat different. Like, yes, practically all modern art has to do with different kinds of juxtaposition, like collages have different things put together, like you usually would not see a piece of a newspaper along with a picture of a wine bottle, along with a picture of a telephone or something, but they'll just put them together there and they make something interesting. So when that was first done, a century ago, people thought, whoa, that's really mind-blowing. But after a while, it became a little less mind-blowing. And then you say, well, what, you look into different nuances of these things.
Right,
And-
but since when did we start caring about whether people have difficulty figuring out what we're doing?
Well, it's not caring about whether people figure, the point is when people did these early kinds of avant-garde art, like early 20th century, say, a lot of them were very explicitly trying to shock people in one way or the other. I mean, when the first Cubist paintings came out, people were, what the fuck? Yeah, I mean, they thought the world is gone crazy, and then a little while later, that starts seeming rather, oh, beautiful. That's nice. And then people started doing different things.
Épater les bourgeoisie.
Yeah. But in the case, like the situation is trying to, Détournement, they're trying to actually use it in a way. They're not just trying to merely randomly disturb people. The idea is that it's mixed in with a content, so that in a way, you might even like, in some of the writings about Détournement, they say this is correcting history. So, for example, Michelle Bernstein, Guy Debord's first wife and one of the founding Situationist people, made a number of pop art-ish paintings in 1962 that were called things like Victory of the Paris Commune, Victory of the Spanish Revolution, Victory of Makhno's anarchist army. Yeah, stuff like this. And the actual content of the thing, it was more or less irrelevant. I mean, she sort of did some kind of paintings, but the whole point was that you had this title of something that didn't exist. But to put that on a painting, the title is like, in history, the Paris Commune should have been victorious. And so it's like you're writing a novel. You write a novel with an ending, whatever. And to do that in a avant-garde painting is like, what? Like usually when we read about the Paris Commune, we just think, oh, tragic, it failed, gosh, what are we going to do about that, or something? But the concept of like saying, well, what would the victory of the Paris Commune have been like, or something? So what would it be like if little kids were talking about making a liberated society? And we're talking about different nuances about capitalism and the state, all these kind of things. So anyway, there's a whole range of things here where you can get into a kind of satirical mode, or it can be kind of just straightforward. But the idea is like, when I've looked at these different things, when they had the Strasbourg scandal in 1966, on the poverty of student life and so on, that was preceded by a comic called The Return of the Durruti Column. And Durruti, of course, was the Spanish anarchist militia leader. And so this comic came out there, kind of saying, attention, students of Strasbourg, something's on the way, and people looked at that and say, what the fuck is this? And it had a different kind of comic thing, where each different image was from different things, they had photographs and different stuff like that. But anyway, it's Mike.
It reminds me of something that happened amongst some people I sort of new who replaced the back in the old days. You used to get your newspapers from newspaper stands, and you put a quarter in or whatever, and lift it up and take it out. Well, they published a new. What you do is you take something that's already legitimated, like the San Francisco Chronicle, and then you reprint the heading, right, the San Francisco Chronicle, and then you put in news stories like, the mayor has just decided to resign because he realizes that what he's doing is useless, and he's been just fooling you all your lives. Anyway, I just thought, like, taking something that is legitimized and then turning it into, delegitimation
Exactly.
is the essence of the
And-
whole thing.
And it's also harder to combat that because one of my friends, named Lee, during the Occupy movement, he put out a public announcement on the web purporting to be from the Oakland mayor. And it looked like it was from the Oakland mayor. And he had her apologizing for having sicked the police on Occupy Oakland.
I remember that.
Yeah. And and people believed it, because it was kind of credible, like the mayor was supposed to be a progressive person and all this, and whatever. And then obviously the mayor, in her office found out, and then they, it was taken down.
Yeah.
But I mean, thousands of people saw this. And at first, you can imagine if you're in their position, what do? Say, no, that wasn't us. We do not apologize for sending in the police to blah, blah, blah. Like either way they went, it was it just put them in an awkward position. And everybody, even if they realized it was fake, Dave.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think the ultimate guide for me, who did that work, was Paul Krasner, if you guys remember The Realist.
Mm-hmm.
Because after the Kennedy assassination, he had to publish from Canada because he was wanted for several crimes in America, publishing crimes. But he put out a magazine called The Realist, which he violated famously Disney's property rights all over the place, using all of the Disney characters in pornographic positions. But he had his own story of the Kennedy assassination, in which Lyndon Johnson goes in the back of Air Force One carrying the body back to Washington, and was caught by Jackie fucking Kennedy through the bullet hole in his neck.
Right.
Carried to extremes, as in that none of those made it into the United States. You had to really pay to get a copy of those.
Yeah.
But
as
Johnson was the hero.
As LBJ himself said about some political enemy, he said, we want to get this guy, like that he was caught, fucking pigs in a, a farm or something like that. And they're going to say, well, nobody's going to believe that. And he said, yeah, but I want to see him deny it.
Well, I'm sorry, I left off the punchline. He said he was supposedly quoting Jackie Kennedy, said he was fucking my husband through the bullet hole in his neck. It was necrophilia.
Mark?
Yeah, a couple of things, just a couple of brief things. Talking about content, I saw a wonderful, small, intense exhibit a couple of, must be 20 years ago now in New York, showing that in the very early days of Dada, right after World War, and a whole lot of that content was very explicitly anti-war. And the other thing was,
Dada was a political movement more than anything else.
Apparently, after the Realist stopped regular publication, he would bring out an issue every once in a while. And I saw one where Gene Schoenfeld, Dr. Gene Schoenfeld from the Free Clinic, God, I forget what his published name was, but in any case, they showed a picture of him shaking hands with Johnny Cochran, but his name tag did not say Gene Schoenfeld. It said OJ did it.
Okay, so let's move on. After the comics, we have this relatively short collection about the unemployment things, and I have an introduction to that, but I'm just going to read a couple things from these leaflets from 1998. Here's one leaflet. It's absurd to demand the, quote, creation of jobs, unquote. Enough riches already exist to take care of everyone's basic needs. They only need to be shared around. As for the production that serves no real purpose, a social revolution will close more factories and eliminate more stupid jobs in 12 hours than capitalism does in 12 years. We will no longer have any reason to produce such things as food colorings, aircraft carriers, or insurance contracts. We don't want full employment, we want full lives. And then here's from a longer leaflet or pamphlet from one of these folks. He's talking about the context here is that it is unemployed people who are doing most of this stuff. And there's even an unemployed people's union in France, but typically the unemployed people's union was urging people to calm down and not, but they were getting overflowed by these jobless people who were pissed off and so on, and started raiding different offices and so on. So at some point, those people, besides going out, located a university room where they could meet publicly. They just took it over, and the university decided not to call the cops, and they just sort of let it happen. So every day, twice a day or something, there would be meetings there where anybody could show up. And it started being unemployed people, but right from the beginning, they said, well, let's have it for anybody, even though we started this way. And so this guy says, so we had these meetings. We set out to discuss everything, beginning with what ruins our lives, work and its pointlessness, parenthesis. Upon taking stock, we concluded that 90% of this society's production are useless bullshit, in parenthesis. Its miserable wages, its hierarchies, its daily horror, and the wretchedness and boredom of unemployment, which we came to realize is merely the flip side of work, a threat held over the heads of workers, forcing them to submit to the economic blackmail. We also talked about money and commerce, and about health and the food we eat and the air we have to breathe. And it soon became clear that from whatever angle you look at this society, you can't change any detail without having to transform the whole thing. That everything is linked to money and profit, and that human beings are treated like any other commodities, paid more or less miserably, exploited, and then thrown away when there's no more profit to be squeezed out of them. Having arrived at these conclusions, we decided to communicate them to others. And then the person goes into detail about, people went out and with leaflets and, disrupting different things, invading different offices, etc. Let's see here. We can, again, as long as money exists, there will never be enough for everyone. These reflections have naturally made us realize that we need to create another form of society, one in which people will decide on their own activity and production rather than being slaves to the present production system. This is obviously a huge project. We know that millions of people share the same feelings and ideas, even if in many cases they're buried somewhere inside them. It's up to us to meet each other if we want to overcome our isolation and submission. We're beginning to write and visit each other. Discussions are taking shape in Paris and around the country. Coordinations and joint actions are being organized. For us, real wealth has nothing to do with money or commodities. We are discovering this richness in our encounters, in our collective schemes, and in our dreams and glimpses of another truly human society, a society we invite you to join us in envisaging and creating. So, any comments on that? Or any of the other leaflets, if you read some of them? Yes, Denny.
I just put this line in my journal. As long as money exists, there will never be enough for anyone. I'd never heard it put that way before. It's quite powerful.
Yeah. And you can take that in more than one way too. Like if there's a sort of Buddhist way to take it, like saying no matter how much money a billionaire has, they're always
I hadn't thought of it that way. Yeah.
There's that, but also as long as there's, there's sort of no way of equalizing it so that there's enough for everyone. It's just an inherently, Brit.
Yeah, kind of that particular subject kind of threw me back on my own work life. And out of 40 years, maybe 2 or 3 were actually meaningful labor.
That's very nicely and concisely put. There was a graffiti in May 68 that had kind of the same thing. It was obviously written by a worker, and it said, you're in 68, and the worker was thinking back 30 years before you had this popular front in France in 1936, etc. And he says, for 35 years, I've been working, and saving and scrimping and all this. And what's my end result? Here I am 35 years later, and I've lived the life of a jerk. A fool.
The
And-
Wobblies used to have a little 3x5 card that said, lay the boss off, it makes more sense.
Yes.
And we would carry a stack of those around, and every time you saw a worker suffering at the checkout stand or whatnot, we'd hand them that card.
Yeah, that's a good one. Any other comments or questions?
That's it.
Okay. Mike?
Utah Phillips had a song called All Used Up, which is about that particular phenomenon. I can put a link to it if you want in the chat.
Utah Phillips is this great folk singer guy, kind of in the IWW hobo, rambling around Woody Guthrie tradition. And he has a bunch of good ones about people who have been there and done that. Judy.
Oh yeah, I just want to put in a word for work. I mean, I worked all my life too, but I think a lot of people get a lot of satisfaction from their work. I don't think it's all bad or that we're a fool because we work. I mean, I think work is pretty tied up with human nature and who we are and all that stuff. And another thing I wanted to say about money, because I kind of feel like instead of creating a whole new world, we should kind of take what we've got and try to, work it back, whatever. But I'm thinking like money, is money inherently evil? I mean, if everybody was given money whenever they wanted, or everybody got a certain amount of money every day or whatever, wouldn't money be changed?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that another way of, would money still, because people do say, well, if you give money to everybody, a year later, the rich people will still have all the money because they're smart.
Yeah, that's because you have the same system.
Well, yeah, but maybe if everybody got the same money, or you could just get money whenever you needed it, it wouldn't really mean that much. People would attach to different, you go and get your food, whatever, if you needed money for that.
That's
but-
right. If you let's put it that way, you have things that money can buy, like food or a home or various, healthcare or whatever. In our society, we use money to buy that. But there's no inherent reason that you have to print up these pieces of paper for that. That has nothing to do with food. There's no law of nature that says you have to plant some dollar bills in order to raise carrots, or they won't grow. They'll be there, but we have a system where some people have monopolized so much of the goods of the world by means of money, they couldn't do it without that one person has 1 billion times more than some other person. And because of that, that person can bribe politicians and, hire guards and armies and everything to crush anybody that wants to change anything. And that's the situation we're living in right now. That as far as the work thing, yeah, actually, there's nothing more fun than work when it's meaningful. But as David Graeber said in Bullshit Jobs or whatever that book, and many others have said, most of the work being done now is bullshit. It's work like in order to advertise things that otherwise people wouldn't buy, to create a need for them, or to protect things that people otherwise would steal because they can't afford them, and to hire judges and to build prisons, and then to have armies so that you can conquer the neighboring country and rob them so that et cetera. And as they said, we don't need aircraft things, and yet they'll spend $1 billion building one of those because of war, and then if it's healthcare comes up, say, oh, we can't afford that. And the politicians will go with that view. Yeah, we can't afford that. We have to give some tax write-offs to these billionaires, et cetera. Let's move on, and then we can come back. I just have these very brief book reports. This World Turned Upside Down is about this book about the English Revolution, and the one about Todd Gitlin is about the 60s. Did anybody have any comments or questions about either of those? Mike?
Apologies. I do have things to say about it, but not at the moment.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Denny?
Just a small thing. Let's see. Hang on one second. In the Gitlin piece, I really enjoyed the definition of Chomsky's fans as passive spectators who take pride in passively consuming more accurate information than is passively consumed by ordinary spectators, and in passively rooting for more, quote, progressive politicians. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the poverty of primitivism, which is a more elaborate thing. And the context of this was in Joy of Revolution. Actually, I'll just read this. In Joy of Revolution, I devoted a brief section to criticizing some current technophobic and primitivist notions, because it seemed to me that these notions were becoming so widespread and so delirious that they were obscuring more serious radical possibilities. This text roused a number of hostile reactions from John Zerzan and Fifth Estate, among others. Further debate was stirred up when an anarcho-primitivist named John Phillis posted the text, my text, on his Internet Anarchy board, interspersed with his own comments. And then I go on there was some discussion of that. And the end result is that I ended up replying to John Phillis's comments. So this gets a little bit complicated because there were also other people on that anarchy board back then. It's kind of a discussion site. I don't know if such things exist now exactly. It was like an early internet sort of forum. So in this text that I did, I quote the Joy of Revolution piece, like maybe a sentence or two from something, and then I quote what Phyllis said about it, and then I give my response to him. So it gets a little bit complicated, but I'm going to give you an example. Here is what I say in Joy of Revolution. Even supposing that life was better in one or another previous era, we have to begin from where we are now. That's italicized. Modern technology is so interwoven with all aspects of our life that it could not be abruptly discontinued without causing a global chaos that would wipe out billions of people. So that's the end of what I said there. So here's Phyllis's response. I think you're bringing in your own authoritarian assumptions. I don't recall any primitivist saying that we wish to enforce a particular lifestyle through the barrel of a gun. So here's my response. Guns have nothing to do with it. The point is that an abrupt breakdown of present technological infrastructures, whether brought about through a natural collapse of the global system or through a hastening of such a collapse by anti-tech terrorism, would lead to the death of billions of people. If you advocate such a solution, you should be honest enough to admit it and to recognize the consequences. And then I have a quote here. And the quotation, when you get to the end of the quotation, it's by Ted Kaczynski, who you may remember was the Unabomber, who had killed a number of people, I don't know, back in the 90s or whenever it was, in the name of anti-tech kind of things. And so here's what he said. When things break down, there is going to be violence, and this does raise a question. I don't know if I exactly want to call it a moral question, but the point is that for those who realize the need to do away with the techno-industrial system, if you work for its collapse, in effect, you are killing a lot of people. If it collapses, there is going to be social disorder. There's going to be starvation. There aren't going to be any more spare parts or fuel for farm equipment. There won't be any more pesticide or fertilizer on which modern agriculture is dependent. So there isn't going to be enough food to go around. So then what happens? This is something that, as far as I've read, I haven't seen any radicals facing up to, unquote. So in other words, here is Phyllis saying, oh, horrors, what are you accusing us for, of doing this for? And I point out that's from an interview you did with the Unabomber and it's on your site. And he's admitting billions of people, are going to die but it's all worth it because then we'll be free from technology. So a lot of this stuff is sort of so glaringly obvious, it's almost embarrassing to read the thing. But, before I did this piece, I would see so many of these cases where people would just be debating pro-tech or anti-tech. Well, there's this and they wouldn't follow through the consequences and so I wanted to really get this down. Like, here's what this guy, how he is responding, and he's responding by ignoring something that's on his own website that was published because he admired the Unabomber. Mark.
Yes, this is kind of checking something against y'all's collective knowledge. I read a piece claiming that Ted Kaczynski had been one of the subjects of the famous
MK Ultra.
famous experiment of people who were told that they were shocking people, and that whole, I forget if it was Harvard or where it was.
Stanford professor.
So
Milgram.
Professor.
Someone affirming that?
Milgram.
I thought it was MK Ultra.
No, Stanford professor.
Stanley
Yeah,
Milgram.
Milgram or something.
Yeah,
like
Stanley Milgram.
I remember this very well. No,
Thanks.
he had people acting in the other room pretending they were being shocked. And the question was how many people would go into the red area. His name begins with a Z, I think.
Yeah, but can anyone confirm or deny that Ted Kaczynski was one of the subjects?
No, I don't know. Sorry.
Zimbardo was his name.
Zimbardo, that was it.
And I don't know whether he was a subject of that. I know that I'm pretty sure it's historically checked out that he was given LSD as part of MK Ultra. I think it was MK Ultra, one of those like CIA uses of LSD to kind of against people's real understanding of what they were being given.
Right.
And it really screwed him up.
Whether that's the only reason, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't put it. Obviously, I'm not anti-LSD.
But it was LSD for possible mind control in the hands of the CIA, right?
Yeah, that's right.
What they were looking at.
That's correct.
Denny?
Ken, I wish you had had a worthier opponent than John Phillis. I mean, I think
a little bit of a feel of shooting fish in a barrel.
Exactly. I was avoiding using that term. It seems like you couldn't get engagement from people who were more able to articulate a critique of technology, and so it wound up being John Phillis. But I mean,
Fifth Estate, in another thing, which I didn't include here because it would be like overkill, but I had another shorter response to John Zerzan and Fifth Estate. And I think the Fifth Estate thing actually was from my friend Lorraine Perlman. It was anonymous, but I was told that it was probably her. Anyway.
Yeah, I to me, the picture of primitivism or the critique of technology that's being presented is almost a caricature, or is focusing on the extremes. I think there were and remain useful ideas where we can critique these things without necessarily saying that means we're going to throw them all out tomorrow.
Right. No, for sure. but the point is, it's kind of up to those people, wherever they are, to come forth and to say, and as far as I was aware, John Phyllis's website was the biggest, it was like a really popular thing. And by the way, people like Fifth Estate, the only reason it was more popular than them is that Fifth Estate was like, oh, the internet, don't touch that. That's computers, bad. So, I mean, if you want to hold up people like that, I mean, in a way, Phyllis at least was using, some up-to-date technology to get his message out. Whereas, back when this was being written, or when Joy of Revolution was coming out, that was the most popular. Like when people said anarchism, back then it was like, oh, you want to go back to the caveman, right? Oh yeah, man, that's cool, or whatever. And then somebody else could say, oh no, we don't want to go back that far, but we want to go back before the Industrial Revolution, or the Middle Ages were a lot cooler because it was more, artisanal or something. And you get all these different things, people kind of bouncing around. And my point here, I know, I was debating what Phyllis said, but the point is Phyllis was pulling out all his weapons. And, he had this.
He was shooting blanks. I mean,
well, yeah, but the point is the people he was quoting, and that you might say were more reputable critics of technology, they weren't coming forth. And I mean, they weren't denouncing him. Like he was speaking for the anarcho-primitivist community. And then when you talk, like I say in many of these instances here, he would say, well, no, only some people believe that.
The time
Or
is 6
I
p.m.
I don't advocate going back that far, da da da. But the point is, on any of those cases, there are a lot of inconsistencies. And in this case, I just took one extreme, very visible, probably the single most significant spokesperson for that thing, and just really went through. And
I'm not sure how representative or how influential John Phyllis was.
Well, like I say, the other people, part of the reason, if they were less influential, like if Zerzan was less, I mean, he's quoting Zerzan. And then when I would talk with the Fifth Estate people, they would say, oh, well, I've often critiqued Zerzan. Well, yeah, but, I mean, if you look at what Fifth Estate put out, maybe they're not saying the same things Phyllis is saying, but here I can.
Well, I think the Fifth Estate's take, I don't, maybe we should take this offline. I think the Fifth Estate's take was more nuanced than.
Well, yeah, but that's not saying very much. It's just like in Fifth Estate, they were saying some of the same things, like what? Rationing? What? Airplanes to deliver food to something, and instead of saying, yeah, what would you do if there's a famine in Australia or something, and there's not enough food? Are you going to say, no, we're not going to use airplanes, that's technology? So when Lorraine came up with such a reaction, here I quote this in here. I said, it is strange to find myself having to explain basic anarchist positions to anarchists. When asked how an anarchist society would work, anarchists have always replied that once people are freed from political and economic repression, they will have a strong tendency to voluntarily cooperate in order to take care of whatever needs doing. And that they are likely to be far more creative in resolving any difficulties that may remain. The anarcho-technophobes seem to have abandoned this belief. If some things are now produced in an alienated way under conditions of capitalist exploitation, they seem to find it inconceivable that liberated people might notice the problem and figure out some different, more sensible and pleasant way to manage. For example, by producing fewer of them, or modifying them so they're easier to make and repair, or automating most of the labor, and sharing the remaining necessary tasks more equitably. So, I mean, that's a response to Lorraine's thing. Ben.
I thought this was pretty interesting. I had questions whether I don't remember. I found Phyllis maddeningly, I said this in the comments, maddeningly obtuse. And I really I appreciated your honesty that you were kind of debating him and pulling him out and hoping to turn the primitivists kind of against each other, like a divide and conquer. Um, I don't, I wasn't hip to primitivism. You know, there was a lot of it floating around in the 90s and 2000s, and I think there still is. There's a weird pipeline from liberals to primitives sometimes because they skip Marxism and anarchism and in their critique of technology. But I appreciated your honesty that you were kind of trying to sow disallegiance amongst them.
Thank you. Ray.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, it's an interesting tension, and I certainly see your point. But I don't know. I mean, to preface, I'm speaking as someone who's, born in 1998, and so my entire life has been pretty deeply colonized by these technological forces, whether it's my education, my personal life, et cetera. It's incredibly difficult to access any form of autonomy or anonymity with the chokehold these things have had on my life as an adult or even as a child. And so I don't know, I struggle with this because I think while I see it's very easy to characterize someone like Zerzan as sort of extremist, I guess from my point, I also see it sort of easy to imagine any sort of like moderate approach to technology and the rate that it accelerates as anything other than naive, because these things have accelerated so quickly and changed our psychology so quickly. And it's difficult to do this sort of calculation of something like a death toll if one were to take all of this away, because while of course that would be this sort of blatant tragedy in many ways, these technological forces are also the very thing that sort of drive these crises, like talking about a famine. Well, often a famine at this point might occur because of rising rates of aridity, increasingly scarce sources of water. And these things are in fact driven by that technology. And so I don't know, I see the difficulty here, and I certainly agree. I mean, at times this camp can make some pretty seemingly crazy claims, and yet I also, again, reading this as someone who's, well, I suppose like Gen Z, you could say it's like reading some of these things that were written in the 90s, it almost doesn't seem so extreme when you see how extreme the acceleration of these things is,
Yeah. I would say again, which I try to clarify in this text, that I think it's more the economic system than technology. When you look around, you see technology, you see computers and computer screens and AI and all these kind of things like that. But those didn't come out of nowhere. Those kinds of things, it's the dominating thing. Like, who owns those technologies? Billionaires.
No, of course. I mean, I agree with
You
that.
know, so
I guess it's,
I mean, if we owned those technologies right now, let's just do a thought experiment. Let's just say it was these people in this group right now. There are 25 or 30 of us, or whatever it would be. And we have to say, oh, okay, we have these potentials. You can create these little computer things, and then they can do this or that, and so on. What would we like to do with these things, if anything?
Totally. I guess my point
Yeah,
is
you
that
know,
I agree with that. I think my point is that I sympathize with the idea that it can be hard to extricate what parts of these technologies are just inherently nefarious in their function and what aspects of these technologies in the way that they function are inextricable from this sort of capitalism, if that makes sense. Like how are some of them sort of inherently extractive, and what would some technology that were commonly owned or something and not meant for this even look like? That's very difficult to imagine. Not that I think it's inconceivable,
Yeah.
of course, but
Yeah, it is hard to imagine, you know, because we are, and the technologies play a role in that. But you might say the same thing about any number of things. Like if money is dominant, you know, the commodity system, this kind of thing, it's almost inevitable that the people at the top are going to tend to try to stay at the top, and the people at the bottom are going to try to rise up, but they have minimal tools to do that unless they all get together. And the people at the top can keep up there by saying, oh, let's put $1 billion into this type of use of this technology. Like, oh, we've got AI. Well, let's use that to provide more efficient tortures so that we can really clamp down and get control on everything. You know, if we were talking about it, we might say, well, can we use that to develop a better surgical thing for a certain kind of disease or something? Can we use it to, you know, we don't, a lot of it, we don't even have to use, like, we don't need vast technology to have more food because there's plenty. In that case, the solution is more simple. It's just that it can be divvied around more equitably. But there are other things like I mentioned, there could be medical things like where a computer, I mean, this is already being used in many cases, you know, where operations can be done that are just vastly more safe and efficient than if you were using the old-fashioned instruments and so on. Danny?
And I don't mind if you don't want to go into this now,
Oh,
but
no problem.
your footnote about Freddie Perlman and providing his own best critique, I don't understand it at all.
Okay.
Could you clarify it for me, please?
Okay. When he wrote a book about C. Wright Mills called The Incoherence of the Intellectual back in 1970. And his critique of Mills, like at a certain point, he was saying that even though Mills was kind of like a, you know, an independent leftist. I don't know that much about him, but, you know, Mills would be looking at the situation back in the 50s, say, and saying, well, what's the deal with the society as it's constructed now? And Freddie is criticizing him because Mills no longer struggles against it. The coherent, self-determined man, that would be like an ideal, you know, radical person or something, becomes an exotic creature who lives in the distant past in extremely different material circumstances. So I'm saying there's a parallel here, even though he's talking about that Mills is maybe hearkening back to Marx's era or something. I don't know what, something like that. I'm saying that the primitivists are hearkening back to this golden age in prehistory. That actually doesn't have anything direct to do with what we're experiencing now, but they're just sort of throwing it back there just to say, well, if we can only get back there, then everything will be cool. And
Okay.
first of all, there's a question if that would even be true. But the bigger question is, well, we can't go back there anyway. So this is a completely meaningless kind of thing to say, like, what would we do? I mean, we take so many of these technologies for granted now, but to just sort of flippantly say, oh, do away with this because we see a lot of technology, let's just do away with it all or with most of it. And you realize, man, are you going to say you've got a appendicitis and we're going to go back before you had anesthetics? I mean, just think about, all these ridiculous things, even if you just went back 2 centuries. I mean, I have a thing in here that I thought was, let's see.
The good old days.
Yeah. Oh, here it is. Okay. So at some point in Joy of Revolution, I'm going to say that even the primitivists, I'm sure, would have enough common sense if they were ever in this situation that they don't want to, if they were in a situation to allow a woman to die in childbirth who could be saved by technical procedures. I mean, I'm giving credit to the primitives. I'm saying they're not this stupid. It's just that they're sort of blabbing away, and they're not thinking about the consequences of this. And then Phyllis answers, childbirth is pretty routine in primitive societies. And I respond, spoken like a real man. As Ray Kuhn, this other person put it, pretty routine, yeah. Either the mother dies or she lives with much worse health or she lives. Either the baby dies or lives for a little while or it lives. All pretty routine occurrences, unquote. And this is me again, about 500,000 women die in childbirth each year, most of them in the less developed parts of the world. Imagine that in a newly post-revolutionary society, a woman is in danger of dying in childbirth unless she has a cesarean operation. Somebody says, let's call Dr. So-and-so. She'll know what to do, unquote. Will Phyllis step forward and say, sorry, you can't do that. My comrades and I have cut the telephone lines so we won't be so dominated by technology. Besides, childbirth is pretty routine in primitive societies, so what's the problem? She probably should have taken some herbs or something. In any case, if some sort of operation is needed, it should be done with stone implements. Precision metal instruments require industrial protection, and that's a no-no, unquote. Of course, I do not suppose that Phyllis or any other primitivist would really respond in that way, but if not, just what would they propose to do? Okay, that's an extreme example, but think about it. It's not that weird. I'm not pulling something out of the hat. 500,000 people die of this thing every year. And in the vast majority of cases, it's probably in places like Africa, they wouldn't die of that in the United States because in most cases they'd be in a hospital and there's routine procedures to do that. But where do those routine procedures come from? They come from various technologies. So you just have to start, instead of just talking about technology as this big thing that has got out of hand, you have to think, well, what are we talking about here? You can't just say, no, we're going to stop doing that. We're going to have to cut off hands because hands strangle people. And so we have to cut off everybody's hands. They're just, Sid.
Yeah, if you look at it, the arguments, like in total, it gets to be pretty ridiculous. And what you did, one of the things that I liked was when you pointed out, it maybe just a little after this, I don't remember exactly where, that you wouldn't even be having this conversation with this guy Phyllis and the other people if it wasn't for technological things.
Right.
It's sort of like I mean, it's almost silly saying it, and you've said it over and over many different times in your responses to these claims that technology is a tool. It's like the question is who's using the tool and what's it being used for, right?
Right.
So, and other people in this conversation have said equal things, like, like um uh, you know I primitive is, I mean, it's almost like the whole IST of it is telling, right? It's sort of like not there's a lot of not thinking. So I guess you were a brave and persistent person to be able to stand dealing, like responding to all this stuff the way you did.
Thank you. Mary.
Okay, so I don't really know what you're talking about, but I got really here. We're want to lower my hand. But when you're talking about the child and how many women die of childbirth, so it's because I've been involved with I have a friend who teaches religion and legal law. So in the United States, we're very high. We have a lot of dead mothers, dead from pregnancy. And you're talking about primitivism. So religion, in some ways, can be thought of as primitive. And the Catholic Church has a lot of they have charity hospitals. And in many states, they're the only charity hospital. You don't have insurance, you have to go to a Catholic hospital. They have a very high death rate for pregnant women, because there's some instances where the fetus no longer develops after 3 months and the body cannot eject it. So normally you do something that used to be called a DNC, you just suck it out. Now they use a vacuum thing and they just suck it out. But that would be an abortion, because the legal definition of abortion is when you remove the fetus, whether it's dead or alive. You can't do that in a Catholic hospital. And the reason that I know about this is that this has been a legal thing, because they don't even tell the woman or her husband or her father that this is what the situation is. They simply say, oh yeah, she's resting comfortably, and they give her morphine and then she dies. Whereas if she could have an abortion, she would live. And they don't even tell people, and people have taken them to court and they've lost. So anyway, that's one. And if you look at where the United States stands on dead pregnant ladies, mothers, we're very high. We're below. We have more dead mothers than any of the European countries and half of the African ones because of this. So that's just like a small point. And it's like I think that's a primitivism thing. Then the other thing you were talking about when you were just mentioning about technology and how the big shots who want to stay in control, that you could develop technical things for torture. Just to let you know, what they've been using, what China has been using AI for, is facial recognition. And a lot of their technology is being used they're selling that information, selling that code, programming, whatever, to other countries. And the reason I know about it is it's in science journals, because it's very impressive. They can they've gotten it so that they don't even need you to have, the camera doesn't have to see you face on. They can have a face on picture and then see you 3/4 and they can figure out. So it's just a small thing. Okay, I'm sorry. This thing about dead mothers because of the Catholic Church, and it upsets me tremendously.
Yes, understandably. So I want to go on to the last text here called Reflections on the Uprising in France. And this happened in 2006. And it had some similarities with that earlier unemployment thing, but it was just vastly bigger. That other thing was like, you know, a few hundred or a few thousand people, different places around the country. This thing involved, I mean, I don't know how many, but you know, maybe millions of people were involved, at least tangentially. And basically what happened is that there was a new law that was proposed in France that had to do with, it was called the CPE, first contrat premier embauche, for your first job contract. And it was a law that made it easier, obviously that would be for younger people, made it easier to fire somebody. In other words, the excuse would be like, so that we can hire more young people and all that, we will tie the employer's hands less, so that they, during your first 2 years, they can just fire you without having to give a reason. You know, you don't have a tenure, so to speak, or something. You don't have any union protections. So this law was proposed in France, and a lot of people didn't like it, especially young people. And in France, unlike in the United States, there's a tradition, almost a habit, of people massing in the streets, if not strikes or something, when the government does something. And it's not unusual that the government backs down. And it's done that in many cases, and that actually happened in this case. You had people blocking the subways, blocking the freeways, invading, you know, political parties' offices, all sorts of things going on. And within a few days, the government, first of all, they propose a more modified version of the law, and then the people keep protesting, and then the government simply backs down and say, okay, enough already, we're not doing that. So it was a victory, you know, that taking place, but it was like a 2-month period there where that was building up. There were things in schools, high schools, all sorts of things. So the main orientation here was that in French, they have a term précaire, which means it's like are precarious. It's like, I don't know if we have a translation for that exactly, but it means like people whose job positions are rather precarious. You know, they don't have job security, they don't have a pension, and you know, they don't have a union, and these various things. And as we know, in recent years in the United States, we've had this a lot. There's whole younger generations that can hardly even think of getting a job. You know, it's become so difficult to do. And in France, they have more social cushions than we do. But anyway, this was impinging on that. And so a lot of people they just kind of picked this law as this is the last straw. You know, it was clear that this is, you know, they could see what this was doing. And so, let's see, I wanted to. So one thing that did not happen is that there were not many workers' strikes. Again, the people directly involved in this were unemployed people mostly, or people, who were likely to remain unemployed or get fired and so on. So I say at this point, the young rebels did not fixate on strikes or factory occupations or passively wait for them to develop. Well, it would have been good, if they had developed, but they went right ahead and carried out their own blockades and occupations. First at their own schools, then spreading other schools, then invading all sorts of other locations. To give some idea of the astonishing quantity and variety of these actions, here is a part of an Agence France-Presse dispatch for just one day. That's like, what do we have, the AP or Associated Press, kind of equivalent of that in France. So here is one day in France. April 6, 2006. In Paris, the title is Anti-CPE Blitz Actions Across France. In Paris, more than 1,000 high school and college students invaded Gare de l'Est, Gare's railroad station, in the morning, then disrupted train traffic for 15 minutes at Gare Saint-Lazare, then blocked the tracks near Gare du Nord for an hour and a half, some of the demonstrators throwing rocks at the forces of order. The young demonstrators then tried to get onto the périphérique, that's the freeway that goes around the city, but were blocked by the forces of order. At Porte de la Chapelle, certain demonstrators used an empty bus as a battering ram to smash police cars. During the morning, other demonstrators disrupted the routes to Orly Airport, one of the two main Paris airports. At Toulouse, the fire department reported that 5 students and 1 police officer were slightly injured during the violent evacuation of the tracks at Gare Maribiaux, which had been blocked for nearly 2 hours by several hundred people. On the outskirts of the city, students and unionists blocked several of the entryways to the Airbus factories at Coulommiers and Saint-Martin-de-Touche. Also in the southwest, Narbonne police dispersed a demonstration on the train tracks, arresting 11 persons. During the morning, a toll-free operation was carried out at the East Narbonne toll road. In other words, letting everybody go through instead of paying a toll. In the north, 500 to 1,000 demonstrators occupied the tracks near the Lille-Flandres station for less than an hour, delaying several trains. And this goes on and on. I have not even read half of this thing. And I end up, I picked this report virtually at random. Almost any other day in March or early April would have offered a similar range of things. I mean, this is astonishing. We'd never, so some of these actions were announced in advance, we're going to invade this place or blockade this thing. Others were done, secretly, like so the police wouldn't know where they should go, to block it or something. Sometimes they're blocking a lot of stuff. Blocking is sort of like the equivalent of striking for non-workers. It's like you're blocking the transportation, you're blocking the entry to this. In some cases, maybe it's just a slowdown. You slow down the traffic so that you can put a leaflet in each car as it goes by. Or, all sorts of things. You invade an office building, and so on. So, as I noticed there, these things were called blitzes, like because they were fast. And so at this point, after having discussed those for a few pages, here I thought this is kind of interesting. I stopped and I said, let's stop and look at these things in more detail. Some blitzes were, flops, some we never heard about, and so on. But the point is, for the moment, it may be more useful to compare the more successful blitzes with other more or less agitprop forms of action, like actions aimed at radically educating or inspiring or subverting people. And so here's some comparisons. Nonviolent bearing witness types of action have the merit of fostering composure and undermining bonds of hatred. But their fear of offending anybody often prevents them from taking the offensive. Blitzes represent a more aggressive, though usually still relatively nonviolent, challenge to institutions and representatives of the ruling order. Countercultural revels can be a lot of fun, but they tend to contain a large element of self-satisfaction, complacently celebrating this or that social identity. Blitzes have a similarly playful and prankish spirit, but the participants remain focused on their grievances without illusions about the conditions in which they find themselves. Their sudden convergence on a particular location is reminiscent of flash mobs and may have been partially inspired by them. But once flash mobs have arrived at their destination, their activity is generally pretty innocuous. You know, you have flash mobs go into a subway station and sing an opera aria or something like that. These are fun things, interesting to do, but they're not exactly disruptive in the way we're talking about here. Whereas blitzes are specifically designed to attack their targets. Mass demonstrations have a greater force of number, but they lack the flexibility that enables blitzes to move rapidly and to disperse and regroup as appropriate. This was the main reason for the development of so-called black bloc tactics in recent years. But black blocs are often caught up in silly fantasies of street fighting or urban guerrilla warfare. Blitzers strive to evade the system's strength and exploit its weaknesses, challenging it on the level of feelings and ideas as well as physical force. While black bloc actions tend to be impulsive, grimly self-important, and purely destructive, blitzes contain a larger element of calculation, creativity, and humor. Guerrilla theater has the merit of abandoning the traditional stage and taking its message out into the world. But a certain spectator separation remains. The radical lesson is still being presented to an audience. Blitzers exemplify their so-called lesson by their concrete disruption of the institution they are critiquing, therefore presenting a more direct challenge to the passivity of whatever, quote, audience may be on the scene. Some of their actions verge on the surrealistic. One of the more popular was to invade a business or government office and simply move all the furniture out onto the sidewalk. Ostensibly, this was a sort of symbolic eviction intended to recall the real evictions that are constantly taking place. But the bizarre rearrangement was probably more astonishing, as well as less risky legally, than if they had simply trashed everything, and it undoubtedly had a more radically disorienting effect than the projects of conceptual artists who get official permission to make some temporary modification of the urban landscape. At their best, some of the blitzes are almost reminiscent of the situationist-style disruptions carried out in the period leading up to May 1968. So far, none of the blitzes have been as lucid or articulate as the situationist scandals, but on the other hand, they have been more numerous and more physically aggressive due to the large numbers of people involved. So I'm going to stop there. Anyway, this was something that was still going on while I was writing this. And in fact, you know, if you remember a subchapter in Joy of Revolution where I talk about radical situations and how cool they are, you know, people are on street corners and all that. I did a sort of email leaflet about, you know, excerpting that stuff. And I emailed that to all my French contacts while this was going on. So that's several hundred French people got this in French, by the way. And some of the French people, while this was happening, thought that this was a contemporary leaflet from France about what was going on then. I found that very gratifying. And I said, no, that was me writing 10 years ago in America. But what I was writing in The Joy of Revolution is exactly what you guys are going through right now. And you pick up on that. So I thought that was really cool. And somebody else did a leaflet in France that was just sort of, plagiarizing Joy of Revolution, that same kind of stuff. So that's great. So anyway, the point is I was doing this while it was happening. And, I had a sense of taking part in it myself, because not only was I writing this article, but I was also, I had, as you know, my website also had graffiti and links and other documents, like some of my French friends that sent me leaflets they had done, and I posted them on my website. So remember, this is earlier in the internet's era, 2006. A lot of people have computers at that point, but they haven't been used in struggles very much. And so this was a fun thing to do. Like, as I was writing this text, I was taking part in that, just as if I had been in Paris and was handing out a leaflet or something. And because I was helping people in Paris find out about something that was going on in Bordeaux, and that they might not have found out directly. So anyway, do you have any comments or questions about this text or that event? John S. Haven't heard from you. Do you have any,
Yes. Um,
or any of
from
the other
the-
things? Doesn't have to be about this text.
yeah, from this text where you had the graffiti, especially the extended one on your on your website, I found a few of the graffiti to be particularly enlivening. The ego is a prison. We're not asking for work. We want cash and kisses. We will support everyone who has been arrested, even if they are innocent. Please leave the state in the toilet where you found it. I really like those. And also on one of those extra articles, from Breakthrough Chaos for Our Children, quote, "You will never succeed in getting your life together within this society because this society is designed to fragment your life. It does everything possible to amputate your intelligence." I love that expression, amputate your intelligence. And I also wanted to mention that I read your article about getting out of the draft, but maybe it's not pertinent to talk about here, but that was fascinating. And I heard recently that in the last 20 years, people have stopped reading books. So I think you should make an audio book of this Joy of Revolution so people can listen to it.
Well,
And I also have a quick question.
Oh.
The way you answered the technophobe guy, it was so brilliant that I just wanted to know, did you ever debate in high school or college, or do you have any training with that? Or
Nope.
just shooting
And of
from
course,
the hip?
it's a whole different thing to do it live too. You can get in a live debate and be caught up, and the other person can make you look silly and nervous or something, even if you're right. Whereas in this kind of thing, I could take my time. I was in no rush and go through everything thing, which was the same thing that guy was able to do too. I mean, he was able to, I wasn't rushing him. He just gratuitously came out with these dumb comments. Sid, you had your hand up earlier. Do you want to?
Oh, I was just wondering how you would compare what came to my mind when you were reading about the blitzes was the recent thing that I think it was the JVP, Jewish Voices for Peace group did on the San Francisco Bay Bridge, where where people, which kind of was kind of exciting, to basically express their feelings about, try to do something about what was happening in Gaza.
Right.
So that seemed like it was similar in some ways. Maybe, so
yeah, I don't know the details of that, but yeah, that's the general idea. Get out there, use your imagination. If something's blocked off over here, find another way to, there's always going to be some weak places where you can,
yeah. And the other thing that I was thinking about earlier, when a lot of the things that you were saying and reading, some of the aphorisms and some of the things like we don't want work, we don't want a job, we want a real life or something to that effect. I was driving back from San Francisco yesterday, and I noticed these advertisements on the side of buildings. Like they almost look like huge graffiti, although I couldn't tell if it was graffiti or commercial. And I was just thinking how lovely it would be for some of some of these statements to be up there, so people could read while they were driving by.
Yeah, that has been done. I haven't seen it recently, but there was like 10 or 20 years ago, there was something, there was a website or various things that specialized in altering billboards.
Yeah.
And there was
the Billboard Liberation Front.
That's it, Billboard Liberation Front, where they would, and of course it's risky, but you would, they'd figure it out to put on workers things so it looked like you were a worker putting up a new billboard or something, so the police wouldn't come. But you can do things like take an existing billboard and just change a few letters and change the message, or paint over something, that, and in any number of ways. It might not even be political. It might be like if you were against tobacco, you would, in the old days where you would see cigarette ads or something, you would change the message where it said, "Oh, this is really for getting cancer," or something. Let's see, Danny.
And there's some people probably don't like to speak out loud, and so they put their questions in the chat. So maybe.
Fine. Let's see here.
Ken?
Yes.
Ed has a couple of questions in the chat, so
okay,
I can read them.
Yeah, why don't you do that? It's
so one, this is Ed Barcelone. What can we do with the technological discoveries that are not beneficial to humanity, but these days are used habitually, like nuclear power? How can we get rid of it? Only when capitalism is abolished? That's one question. Do you want me to?
Yeah.
Talk about that one, or you want me to read the second?
Yeah. I'll just quick answer. I mean, hopefully there are some things that we can do. Like there can be so much pressure that somebody stops doing something. There are some other things that you really do need to change the whole system, or it's not ever going to happen. But there's nothing that makes nuclear power essential. It's there because of certain reasons. And actually there has been a lot of opposition to it, which has held it back. I mean, so people can continue to do that, but they were doing that like 40 years ago or something, somewhat successfully. And I know in various places in America and Europe anyway. So we don't, we can fight any of these individual things, where they are. And it's just kind of up to people to choose, like, what are your priorities here? I mean, you can't do 50 struggles at once personally. So you decide where you think it's worthwhile. And that kind of winnows them out. It means that there are some things that get neglected, that's the way it is. But if you start out with people just aiming at things that particularly piss them off or inspire them, whatever, that's a good start. And then you can look around and maybe you'll see that even though you're enthused, nobody else is there. So, okay, maybe I'll turn my attention to this other thing where people are excited. And then once in a while, people get excited, like that anti-CPE thing or something. There are all kinds of laws being passed all the time, but one thing it's kind of a fluke. You can't predict, like, this is going to cause an uprising.
Data centers.
Okay, that's something that has just come up within the last few months. I don't think we ever even heard of them before that. They existed, but and that turns out to be something that an awful lot of people, even right-wing people in some cases, are really pissed off that it's fucking up their community or whatever it would be. So that's an example of something that, great, maybe you can put that on your banner, and if there's a protest, you can say, hey, get these data centers out of there, whatever. You can focus on that, and then maybe other things might be also important, but they don't have that oomph with them right now. So we can't just determine, like, we're going to, like, if we're calculating it out, it's kind of masses of people. It's like that concept of hive mind that I used in my last Trump piece that we'll get to in a couple meetings here. It's just sort of an amorphous thing, and you can't predict very much what's going to happen, but sometimes people just pick up on something and then it just takes off. Other times it doesn't. Let's see. Gerhard, haven't heard from you. Any comments or questions?
Yeah, Ken, thank you. My mind has been going towards a history I had with a group called Seriatim, which is a quarterly magazine for several years that was put out by a group of people that were influenced by Ecotopia. And Ernest Kallenbach was, as far as I know, a film reviewer that worked for UC Berkeley, and he came up with this ecological vision of the future and wrote about it in a novel. And this was before the Whole Earth catalog came out. And that magazine actually resembled what we did for several years, with a bunch of people that came down from McMinnville, Oregon, very much farm country, and they came down here, and I joined them for some years. And it sounds like in some ways they're guilty of the primitivist kind of thinking that makes it pretty unfeasible. But on the other hand, they really did make a difference. And there's places all over the Northwest that are still modeled after the model Ernest Kallenbach laid out.
Right.
Yeah, you familiar with this work?
Yeah, I know that work. I read that. I mean, we're going to be reading in the months to come several different kind of utopian, projected different kind of societies. And so that was one that I would say was less imaginative than some, because it sort of tried to make it credible that you would have this, peaceful ecotopia in Washington and Oregon and Northern California, basically, and as if those parts had seceded and developed this nice ecological, decentralized and all that kind of ecological society. And so it's, not a very realistic kind of thing, as if the rest of the United States would tolerate that. But it was interesting. And as you say, it inspired, it had a vision. And I think the vision could have been more radical, but it's enough of a vision to say, yeah, why don't we go in that direction? So that's good. Part of this whole thing that we're doing for the next 3 years here is to look at different visions. That's a vision of community. And also to look at different styles of revolt, and the two things are kind of go together or complement each other. And we'll hopefully see out of those things widen some perspectives. Most, if not all, utopian kind of things have some flaws, but there can be some of them that really, give you an idea. Oh yeah, why people could live like that, or that's an interesting sort of little thing that those people came up with, or something.
The current criticism I've just come across is he never deals with the subject of money, except going back to some very early ideas about, gifting and exchange.
Right. Yeah. You'll say, well, maybe we'll barter a little bit more, but yeah. And as long as that's sort of left there, then the question is, when that money is there, you've got billionaires. And are the billionaires just letting the ecotopia secede? Of course not. So let's see here.
Kim, what was the other question?
Yeah, go ahead, Danny.
No, I was asking Kim what the other question was, if he still had it.
Oh, let me find it. Ken, can you tell us a little bit more about your opinion on Black Bloc and their tactics?
Yeah, and he goes on to say, it seems to me they always end up doing more harm than anything, and I wouldn't be surprised if the movement was infiltrated or initiated by police. Absolutely. And as we will see in our next meeting 2 weeks from now, will be devoted to the Occupy movement. And in the Occupy movement, there was some Black Bloc stuff going on. And I criticized them pretty sharply there. But, it was a tricky kind of thing because a lot of that Occupy stuff centered around, or for me anyway, Occupy Oakland, which was probably the most militant Occupy in the country, certainly one of them, and pretty big. And so we saw how that played out. So I think you will see when you do the readings of I have, I think, 8 different texts and talks that I did about during the Occupy movement in which I was really involved. And in some of those talks, I answer an interviewer's like, what about the Black Bloc? So I think we'll get there in more detail next time where we can kind of see how it plays out. Mark.
I just want to mention, I could even just read it. Ben posted a further comment on Black Bloc. If anybody,
sure, go ahead.
Okay, this is Ben Trippy. Black Bloc is not a group of people or even a mentality/ideology. It's a tactic to avoid police repression, like encryption, and work together without getting identified. It's not different from the blitz tactics Ken describes, but concealing identity, especially important in an age of surveillance.
Then somebody, is that a new message underneath it? Says there's
From Bentropy, yes. It's not new. It's been there since, oh yeah, it's pretty new, 644.
It continues. I'll read it. It's not a movement either, by the way. There's
Danny, we're not getting your vocal, Danny.
Danny, your connection is hiccuping. Can I read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. I'm the one who wrote it. It's not a movement.
Can you hear me? I was reading the
No, your connection is glitching, Danny. I'm gonna read it.
We couldn't hear you, Danny.
The Black Bloc has become a figure in liberal media and near center liberal media that it really stands in for militancy in general. And it's often opposed, the good protester versus bad protester dichotomy is something that elements of liberal media and the near left like to hold up. And the good protester always chooses tactics that work within a system that I think the situationists could see was rigged against meaningful change. You're allowed to protest, but only insofar as you make yourself arrestable, for instance. I think people should let go of their conceptions of Black Bloc as necessarily vulnerable to police infiltration. The police can infiltrate all kinds of things. There's no evidence that the Black Bloc is a tactic that has made, is particularly vulnerable to that.
Well, I have to say that I personally, when this was happening in October, November 2011, after the would-be general strike on November 2nd, I think it was, that was about the high point of my life, that month before then. And I had a good friend, Lauren Goldman, some of you may know. He was in Korea at the time. He flew in back to the Bay Area to be there. And I was there with him and with about more than 50,000 other people in Oakland, downtown Oakland. And man, there were no police. The police they had been pulled back. It was so huge. It was like a small May 68 kind of thing, or maybe even bigger and locally. And we blocked the Port of Oakland, which was an illegal thing to do. And 40 or 50,000 people took part in that. And, everybody was walking on clouds then. And there was no liberal bullshit at all. This was had nothing to do with that. And that night, there was some small amount of Black Bloc type of things that vandalized the neighborhood around the Occupy Oakland. And the next morning, I had been looking up, after this thing, I was thinking, man, we can even coast on this thing for the next months. This is going to be in headlines all over the place. People are excited. They're going to be telling their friends all over the world, this. And then I heard about that and my heart sunk. I said, this is completely meaningless. When you have something like you've closed the fucking port of Oakland and you go over and smash some windows, you know, stuff like that. What the fuck is that? Like, yeah, in other situations, maybe, but in that, you know, and I knew, I said to my friends, I just, uh-oh, now we're going to hear nothing but about the smashed windows for the next month. And the fact that there were 50,000 fucking people out here stopping that is going to be off the headlines. That's going to be on page 2 because we have these little fucking morons that decide it's a great idea to go out and break some windows. So if they weren't cops, they should have been because they were, you know, they were absent. And that's what happened.
I was at both. I was at both of, you know, I was there during the day at the port. And I agree with you. I was elated too. I think the history of window smashing, which is sometimes looting, was well included in you know, various French actions that you'd be enthusiastic about. And it's, you know, one way of thinking about it is decommodification. If your problem is with window smashing, you should make that the object of your critique. This image of the black bloc is a trope, it's a spook. And I think, you know, it's worth thinking about what's a useful target. You're even you're alluding to there are times when window smashing or looting or whatever vandalism is creative, constructive, moves things forward, and there's times when it's not.
Yeah. And it's not that it moves things forward exactly, but like when the people in Watts did that, they weren't calculating like, hey man, we're going to show how macho blah blah we are. They were just desperate. They were really mad and they were getting killed, and you know, there were black people living in the United States. They have all sorts of reasons to be pissed off. And so if they do something like that, fine. You know, but even the situationists, Du Bois wrote that great article about the Watts riot, and he said, we will defend this. You know, we're not saying, oh, tisk, tisk, you hurt property or something like that. But he also was not saying, this is how you make revolution. He was saying, here's what's happening here. And what's happening is that people are pissed off, they're desperate, and they do this. And then the liberals and the middle, you know, business as usual commentators are saying, oh, horrors, what's happening? Why weren't they more reasonable? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but that's not that, like in the case I was talking about with Occupy Oakland, we had just blocked the port of Oakland. Try to do that. Yeah. You know, more than 50,000 people had come there. It was joyous. It was blissed out. And it wasn't blissed out in a liberal way. It was blissed out like, we are winning. There's a new world happening. We're creating it. And then some geniuses decide, oh, well, let's go smash a window. What the fuck is that? You know, like I say, if you're a black person in Watts, maybe that sounds like, okay, that's what I feel like doing.
Can black people and non-masculine people participate in Black Bloc? I think again you're creating a cartoon that they're macho or that they're non-black and that they aren't consumed by the same kind of anger or
I understand that some of them are, and some of them are cops. Quite frankly, I mean, this is like an ABC thing. Like, anytime something is happening, I mean, this you can go back like 100 or 150 years in Europe, all over the place. Like, Italy was in a huge movement post May 68, like in 1969, 70. And there were workers occupying factories. I mean, it was kind of like May 68 going on, or in potential. And then suddenly there was a bomb thrown on some square, and you know, I don't know if police were killed or a few people were killed or something like that. And instantly everything stopped. And for the next many months, all eyes were on who did it? What? Who? The bomb? Da, 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 da. Instead of thinking about, hey, how can we change the world? People say, what's the latest news? Police are fragging, blah, blah, blah. You know, and it worked. And that was a police provocation. And that, by the way, isn't a guess. That was proven several years later.
How do you?
Yeah, I'm not saying police provocation or infiltration never happens. I don't think it's necessary in order to explain phenomena like looting, black
No,
bloc,
it isn't. Of course,
militancy.
you know, I'm just saying, yes, these things will happen, but it doesn't mean the point is you have to be aware, like, this is so, what I'm saying is so much the case that it's just an ABC for police. When this is happening, like, okay, we need to send out the squad here and, you know, burn down a building or something. We need some distraction here.
Yeah,
I don't think police need the excuse. They do it anyway.
Well, that's what I'm saying. In other words, the police know that this is a counterproductive thing, and that's why they do it. That it's going to divide people, you know, so that now are you for or against the black bloc? What the fuck does the black bloc have to do with anything? You know, it's just like they're raising this thing that isn't 1% of the movement. It's just basically some young macho guys.
It isn't. It's lots of different kinds of people who participate in it. And I think you're reiterating I have a great respect for you, Ken, but I think you're reiterating exactly the tactics that the ideological riot police and the media use of like presenting people. There are sometimes excesses in movements, as you know, detail, that expecting things always to be orderly or beautiful in and always well, like perfectly calculated. That has nothing to do with black bloc. That's just the nature of mass movements. And I think you're reiterating the cartoon of black bloc as macho, as white, as, you know, always pointless. And I'm sad that you're, I think if you would have much more sympathy if you were more connected with them.
Well, I probably would, but I don't I don't want to be.
All right, I'll end my counter.
Mark.
Yes, I just have a quick question for the orientation of a relative newbie to this approach. If it's within the scope of what's allowed, if one could just identify a couple of news sources that fall into this category of, what was it, near left, that was being talked about a little while ago. I don't know how to position myself in the spectrum to know what that is.
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Well, someone a while ago, you see, it's been a while, so I've been waiting for a long. Someone was saying that such and such attack, you know, that well,
I think I said it, and I just meant that there's a range of political opinion and tactic, that someone isn't either left or right. There are elements of the left that sympathize with capitalism, for instance, or the liberal media, and there are elements that critique it more. That's all I meant.
Well, but there was a specific, it may not have been you then, because there was a specific mention of the fact that opposition to things like the window breaking was also taken up by near left media sources. And I just wonder if anybody can give me a sort of a picture of who that might be. And maybe you don't like to mention the names of, but I'm just curious about that. If anyone remembers saying that.
No, what Ben is saying, I mean, of course, this is a common thing that the sort of liberal bystanders or something are going to be saying, oh, if only they were more orderly, or the good protesters and the bad protesters. But that's also a phony thing to say, well, they say that. That doesn't mean that these other people are not provocateurs, just because I think we probably Brett, you had your hand up, I think. Did you have something to say?
I was just thinking back to civil rights status and James Bevel trying to explain the discipline before a demonstration. Said if you hit a cop in the eye, the papers will talk about a blind cop for a week, not about civil rights. I mean, I don't let the discipline be verbal, but there has to be some sort of discipline, whatever action you're taking part in.
Well, we will be getting into this 2 weeks from now when we discuss Occupy, and then you will have had a chance to read my texts there about Occupy, where I do go into some of these things in some detail. And if you want, you can also research other Occupy related things. And then 4 weeks from now, we'll have our final meeting, and that will include stuff about Trump and the coronavirus pandemic and things like that. So thank you very much for your questions and comments, participation here. And
thank you.
I hope to see you all and bring your friends 2 weeks from now. So I am going to pause or stop the recording.